Yeah, I would like to say that this series is the spoken analog of living in the world of ideas discussion forum. In a discussion forum, we engage through writing. In this series, we engage through speech. And I've seen that in the discussion forum, there are people who do not say anything, ask questions or respond to questions, but they are still reading and without interaction. And it is possible that here also there might be people who are watching but not asking or commenting, whatever. But it doesn't matter, whichever way it is. Yes, the spoken version for the people who prefer to speak rather than write, or prefer to do both, speak and write. I would like to cite an anecdote about an hour ago. I suddenly it suddenly occurred to me that I didn't know whether I had a shower or not. So I casually mentioned this to Tara, and Tara said, well, I also had the same problem. She wasn't sure if she had taken a shower. And so she looked at her laundry basket. There was nothing there. And that meant that she hadn't taken a shower. Notice this is a question of historical inquiry, and we're using abductive reasoning to find out things about the past. You could also say this is counterfactual reasoning. So the reasoning was, had she taken had a shower, then she would have had the clothes in a laundry basket. But then the question would be for me. I also checked and I did not find any clothes in my laundry basket. But then it could have been the case that I had my shower in the morning and I had moved that to Tara's laundry basket. So there is still some degree of uncertainty. So Tara said, no, that is not the case, because you brought clothes yesterday and not today. So had you taken your shower at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, then you would have had your dirty clothes in the basket. Mm-hmm. Now, in this particular case, I had to trust Tara's memory that said that I brought the clothes yesterday. If her memory was false, then my conclusion would also be false. Okay, so we keep asking these historical inquiry questions. At some point, you have to say, well, I'm going to take Tara's testimony as a fact for now, as expressing a fact. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. But the interesting part of it is that we are both using abductive reasoning, which is central to historical reasoning and central to theory, construction, and history. Okay, this is just something that I wanted to share. It is not a 2-minute lecture, even though it does sound like a lecture. It's an anecdote. Okay. Yeah, now the floor is left for the people who are here.
I see that Russell begins his chapter, in fact, the book of the problems in philosophy with this question: is there any knowledge in the world which is so certain that no reasonable man could doubt it?
Yeah.
And then he goes on to describe a brilliant example about a table, how the table's texture, color, the table size, the table itself, everything could be doubted. But that you are writing on the table is no reason not to doubt the existence of the table itself. It's a long explanation, but a very nice chapter to begin a book.
Does he raise the question about doubting his own existence?
I haven't gone there. I mean, I have just begun the book, so I'll be going there soon. Yeah. But I remember one instance. I think this was at a retreat in the Koi Pond or Dakshin Chitra, where you had picked up one chapter of this Problems of Philosophy and said that we should all read that. A few pages, probably. One chapter. I don't recall which one. I don't recall what chapter. But I remember that you said that it was not an easy chapter. It's a very tough one to negotiate. So
yeah,
yeah,
I think so. Yeah, but it is worth struggling with.
yeah.
Yeah.
On this birth question, which you had raised earlier, I had a session, or we had a session, I don't know, some time ago, on how it's nearly impossible to say with absolute certainty that you were born on a particular day at a particular time, going through, issues like, okay, now whose clock is that? Was it the doctor's watch, or was it the nurse's watch? Was it your mom who told you, or who told you? And what does it mean to be born at, say, 4:40 a.m. and 30 seconds in Bombay versus 4:40 a.m. and 30 seconds in Calcutta?
Yeah.
And just go on. And then if you dissect further, then you get into microseconds, you get into something else. So certainty disappears totally. The thing is that you don't know when you are actually born. Okay, if somebody asks you when were you exactly born, that exactly is a problematic question. It's impossible to define. At the same time, the contrast is that we all celebrate Buddha Purnima, Gandhi Jayanti, or some other Jayanti, Janmashtami and Ram Navami, and whatever else, Christmas, and a whole lot of things, assuming that some people were born on a particular day, and then the day needs to be celebrated. So, but if you ask somebody when were your grandparents born, that itself would lead to a lot of doubt. Probably no date would be available. Probably, perhaps the year, possibly the year, but beyond that, when exactly was your grandfather born or grandmother born is a difficult question to answer. And then one more generation, we are gone. There is no there is no date. There is no date, nothing at all. Possibly the year. And then after that, even that disappears. But how
can
do
you answer the question in terms of year? Can you answer the question when you were born, Sriram?
Yeah. I can answer the question.
What is the answer?
1963. But see, that again is a problematic one.
How do you know that?
No. So let me get to it. So 1963 itself is a problematic. The Gregorian calendar itself was changed at some point of time. So what is this 1963? What does it even mean? We don't know, because Jesus was not born in the year 0, and then we don't count from the year 0. So there is no. This 1963 is a very vague kind of a yardstick in some sense. That is all about it. Because at some point of time it was corrected. Certain days were taken out of the calendar because they had to adjust the various calendars across the world. Sometime in the 18th century, some days in the month of September were taken away.
They were trying to fix the leap years that they overcounted, I believe.
Something like that, yeah. So from September 20th followed September 4th or some such thing. There were labor disputes in England because the laborers were losing wage for the number of days were knocked off because it was assumed that the days didn't exist even though they had worked. So it's a hazy question, problematic question. I'm just fulfilling the conditions for mentioning my year in a certain way, which has been accepted, and I'm doing that. That is all about it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
But Shriram, maybe we could consider counting backwards from today and think of how long ago you were born. So you don't get into the thing of the years, but think in terms of some unit and think backwards from today and think of how long ago you were born.
But
at least you don't need a calendar.
Okay, but that again is problematic because I don't have memory of the date of the day I was born. I have no memory. Nobody has memory, right? Nobody remembers the day one was born. It has been told to somebody that you are born on that day. That is all a human being remembers. Now that could be a lie for some reason. I might have actually been born one day earlier, one day later, or in some other hospital or at home or wherever. I might have been exchanged for some baby. We don't know. We just presume that this is okay. Now somebody says that you were born on this day. I accept that. That is all. That happens much later in life. But no memory exists to the extent I know, for for any human being of the date and time that one was born.
So the moral of the story is you cannot answer any question about knowing unless you assume certain things, the truth of which you cannot actually take for granted. We say, okay, let's assume that this is true.
And these are actually problematic in real life. For example, we have a army general who disputed his date of birth because he was denied a promotion, or he was denied an extension of in office. The case went up to Supreme Court. So here was a man who did not remember, or who did not corroborate his date of birth as per records, and then said that I was actually born on this day. I don't remember how that case was decided, but this involved the chief of the army staff about his date of birth. He didn't know, or he presumed. I mean, he claimed that he didn't know. So,
so essentially, you're saying that all Supreme Court judges should read Russell's Problems of Philosophy before they become judges.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
In the US context, this is sort of like deciding civil cases where absolute evidence is not needed, just a preponderance of the evidence. That is, you are more likely to have been born at this time and on this day, or at these many years before your current before the current day today, rather than specifically saying it is on this nanosecond and this microsecond in this second of this day did we try doing this. So it seems to be more of a balance of probabilities to establish a fact here, more than actual I can't think of what hard evidence you can provide for this, except maybe, for example, taking Sriram's blood cells and dating them in some way. But I think we don't need to go that far. We don't need to exsanguinate him to decide this.
Yeah.
But even if you did date the blood cells, there would be uncertainties and assumptions in that as well. So you can't get away with the assumption making.
Yeah. How do you know that the test is, error-free?
Yeah.
You could always go the astrology way. And, if you give the whatever you have as a record of your time and date of birth, give it to the astrologer, and the astrologer calculates and makes predictions. And if the astrological predictions match your life, then that is correct. That's one way to go.
So you're saying you could use a theory to establish a fact.
Yeah.
From one fact to another fact. Yeah.
I'm going to be quoting both you and Thara when somebody asks me how old I am from now on.
Yeah, but this is like the question that Rashmi asked me just before you guys came. She asked me, how are you? And it was very hard for me to answer that question because I had to consider a great deal of data and arrive at a good conclusion on the basis of that. I was thinking about the kind of data I can appeal to. By that time, it was time to start the session.
There is this interesting story about I think Varaha Mihira, and probably that's why he was called Varaha Mihira. I don't know. Predicting a king's some king's son, probably, to be a short-lived kind of a life. He was not going to live beyond a certain age and date, and then he would die on the date or some such thing. So based on the time of this child's birth, so the king makes every attempt to, and he was going to be killed by a wild boar. That was the prediction. So the king makes all precautions. The king doesn't allow the son to go out at all. So the king and the son are in the palace. The son is in palace, is just growing up in the palace, not seeing probably any animal beyond humans. And so no question of wild boar killing him. And on that day, the fateful day, he goes to the terrace because it was very sultry inside the palace room. And he stands, or he lies down on the terrace, and the pillar which the king's sort of emblem or something on the top is actually the wild boar. So that breaks and falls directly on this guy, and he gets killed. So the prediction is that astrologer was right, and whatever the king did could not prevent. I mean, there are umpteen stories. We can just go on and on about this, how astrological prediction at somebody's birth predicted the date of the life ending. And whatever one did, that end would happen, was the kind of story that is narrated.
Yeah, but in this case, Sriram, to test the prediction, you need to read Russell, because it depends upon the meaning of a wild boar.
Yeah, right.
When you say wild boar, do you mean an inanimate thing, animate thing, or either?
Yeah.
Or like the thought of, this wild boar being there and is going to kill me, and just that haunting thought just kills me.
Yeah. In that case, did the wild boar kill me? Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I've been meaning to point out, which I sort of mentioned in the email before this, is I think I want to like disentangle the problem of, defining the like instant of your birth and sort of narrowing it down to some like absurdly small like unit of measurement. I mean, to me, it seems like the event of your birth or any other event really is more something that happens in an interval, no matter how short that interval might be.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that question of like some notion of infinite precision is different from the question of, oh, was Sriram actually born in like 1963?
Yeah.
And what is the evidence you can find? So I think those are two slightly different questions.
Yeah.
We run into a problem even with the time, because right now the time is the Greenwich Mean Time and, the GMT. And then we are 5.5 hours behind it. The whole of India is 5.5 hours behind it. We don't have multiple time zones in this country, even though it is vast enough for a few time zones, 15 degree per hour kind of time. We don't know. But supposing that changes, supposing tomorrow Trump says, it's Washington time, which is the standard time of the world, everyone change. And so then what happens? Then 3:30 of today would be probably 8:30 p.m. or whatever. Some adjustment would happen. So what is this notion of time, as in the small t, not the big time, concept of time, but the hours and minutes that we are looking at across the world in a very uniform way, that is again based on a certain kind of parameter that we have defined and decided. So if that changes, that didn't exist 200, 300 years before. Nobody in this part of the world nobody in this part of the world knew anything about Greenwich Mean Time before the British came.
Yeah.
So,
but the issue that Rain is raising is that this exists even in space. So, for example, if I ask the question, how tall is Rain? If you want to specify it with infinite precision, like, for example, millimeters and, whatever, nanometers and so on, then it's impossible to specify. But if you say Rain, he's somewhere between 1 foot and 20 feet. That's, that may not be accurate in the sense of the region, but you can bring it down to some kind of agreement, like say between 5 and 6 or something to that effect. Now, this is independently of the problems of time. It exists in any statement, in any knowledge claim. If you're willing to abandon infinite precision, exactness, and say approximately such and such, it becomes possible to provide evidence and arguments.
And not to sort of, I don't know, make bold, almost dogmatic statements, but like to me, the notion of infinite precision is ill-defined anyway. So to me, the alternative would only be to define things in terms of what you just said.
yeah, then infinite precision would let you rely on let's say counting numbers, which means units, or rational numbers or real numbers, and by the time you come to real numbers, you have lost all touch with reality. Not all touch. That's perhaps too strong. Not all touch. Yeah.
Also, I think there are two. I mean, I'm not able to express my discomfort exactly, but there are two things being conflated. Like, one is whether such a moment or interval exists where we were born, which depends on the definition of being born and so on. And then the second part is whether it's possible to determine this moment or interval in whatever unit.
Yeah.
And the third is whether any record of such an interval or moment is meaningful.
Yeah.
And I feel like Sriram is talking about the third. But from what I'm understanding, Rain is talking about the second. And what it means to say this is the moment you were born, and not whether the record of your existence on this is right or not, which is a separate issue, which which depends on the credibility of sources of information and sources of knowledge. Whereas the other issue is about the uncertainty of existence of something, which, so I don't know if I'm expressing correctly what I'm trying to say, but I feel like there are two slightly different things that we may be mixing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so there is the problem of measurement, machines measuring, which may not, I mean, the accuracy of the measurements themselves. And if you start looking around, you find that anywhere there is measurement, there is a certain, you have some range of inexactness. So the precise time or precise unit of measurement is probably not possible.
And this has the background for this question is the claim that physics is an exact science, but history is not an exact science. But even physics is not an exact science.
But
there is no, yeah.
It's more if you reduce the precision, the certainty it increases. Like
it increases.
One
Yeah.
might be certain about the exact moment.
Yeah.
But then if you get it down to the day of the year, or you to the year or the decade,
yeah,
then certainty increases.
Yeah.
Yeah, so certainty increases and accuracy, precision decreases.
Yeah. That's a negative correlation between the two. That sounds very much like Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Also, to get back to Sriram's point, to me, this notion of what I think you're referring to is not necessarily, it sounds to me like an issue of how we're labeling certain events in time. And I think that, yeah, you're right. Somebody might come along and, declare that, we're all switching to DC time. To me, there's a very clear way from how you go from one label to the other label. And so you can always work backwards and say, okay, depending on which system you're using, you can label this event as, June 4th, 1963 at 10 a.m. versus June 4th, 1963 at 10 p.m. Like you could, you're labeling these events differently, but, the event of, you're trying to capture simultaneity of, say, like I was born at this time or I was born at the same time as some other person. To me, those are problems completely independent of how you choose to label events in time.
Yeah. That is very similar to Fahrenheit versus centigrade. There is a conversion table that you can use to avoid complications. Just mere number is not enough. You have to use the conversion table if you're using a different system. And exactly the same thing with respect to, the word gallon, which means different things in US versus England. So people might disagree because they use the how many liters per gallon use different system. But once you are aware of it, I think those problems can be easily solve whatever problem. And the same thing about we decide how precise you want to be. That's all. I just want to point out that some of the people who are here, for example, Shilpa, Jhalak, Grace, Akilan, and so on, haven't said something. Is that because the others have been?
No, I'm just taking it in. Just my first time with all of you, so I'm just kind of listening to all of you.
Yeah, but that is also true about others, right? Not just you. The only person for whom it is not the first time would be Edda. There may be half of us it is not the first time, but for others, Grace, for example, it's the first time, I'm pretty sure, right? And Jalil has had interactions with me, but not in a Zoom session of this kind. So that is true about.
Good afternoon, sir. I say I'm traveling. That is, I'm becoming silent. That is why
okay.
I'm listening. Okay, thank you.
That is justifiable, but you called me sir, which is very insulting.
No, I used to call. That is a Kerala tradition. So thank you, Dr. Mohan. Okay.
I see. So you switched from sir to doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, I'm just trying to understand. It's not like it's like I'm just, I have gone through the material you have sent for this history, and I'm trying to understand and relate with, and I'm really, just as Shilpa has just now shared, that we are just making sense of it, and then we can really share. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you think there is anybody here who has actually understood the document perfectly, including the people who wrote it?
Okay, not like understanding in terms of like how I'm like relating it with myself and my, so that is what, and that's why I'm like little not speaking, but yeah, we will definitely continue to.
One way of getting a better understanding is to speak.
Okay.
That's a path to better understanding.
Okay.
Otherwise, you are denying yourself that opportunity.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll try that.
I had a point, which I think you briefly mentioned that you mentioned this statement about physics being an exact science and history, and history not so much. So that was something I felt there is some merit to that argument, because with the assumptions we make in physics, like we can empirically test most of the claims, at least in theory, given the measurement error and so on. But when we talk about historical claims, we need to take things on faith value, like in the sense, when most things don't have archaeological evidence, if certain things are preserved only in terms of writings, then that is the only evidence that we have. There's no way we can go beyond that and try to test it. And if someone argues that, hey, the person who wrote this text was probably lying, then there's no way you can dispute it. So yeah, but in physics, you can, there are always, at least theoretically, at least in principle, given infinite resources and infinite measurement precision, you can test everything that is possible. Would you agree with that statement?
The point you're making is that there are reasonably well understood theories in physics, and we can rely on the theory to test claims and so on. Whereas when it comes to history, we don't have theories of that kind. We develop with sufficient rigor. Now, I'm not saying the same degree of rigor as in physics, but some degree of rigor such that we can engage in questions of this kind. So that was why we raised this question: how do you construct theories in history?
Okay.
And if you look around, do an internet search for theories in history, you will find things like the cyclical theory, or of let's say rise and fall of civilizations and so on.
Right.
Toynbee, Spengler, and so on. Those are some of the common theories. But if you look at Toynbee's theory, what is regarded as a theory, it's actually a kind of idea. It's not a theory. It's an idea, and it's not clear how you test that idea.
Yeah.
It's like a theory seed. So if you're just told that the Earth revolves around the sun, you don't know how to test it. Unless other propositions are added, and more propositions are added, and these propositions are logically connected.
Okay.
So if you have a sufficiently large body of theoretical propositions logically related, you cannot deduce their consequences. And the same thing is true about Toynbee's idea for a theory. So to test whether that theory is correct, we have to develop it. This happens in many domains.
Okay. By develop it in the sense, do you mean that I am able to deduce some, there are some predictions that follow from those positions?
Yeah. To test the predictions as well as to find out if the theory if it's a scientific theory, it has to explain something.
It's been can I say something, or more? Are you done?
No, I'm done. Yeah.
So, for example, I would leave Toynbee, but take something like what is popularly called the Thucydides trap. The Thucydides trap is, it basically says that if there is a dominant power, political power, a state or a city or whatever, and there is an emerging power which threatens this, that would end in violence. There would be a clash between the two. They cannot coexist. So this has happened time and again. So this goes back to the times of Athens and Sparta. So the moment you have two city-states which were very powerful, there was a clash. The Peloponnesian Wars were basically because of what we now call as a Thucydides trap. So he was the guy who first documented it. Then we had Rome and Carthage, and then and so on. Britain and Germany in the 20th century, 1914, both were equally powerful, and Germany, in some sense, wanted to overthrow. That was not the stated aim, but wanted to be the dominant power. Now, what has been happening is that that has been happening only in the last 40, 50 years, probably not earlier, that this has been revived as a concept. Now, they are saying that, look at China and America. Now, these two guys are fighting. So China is the emerging power. The US is the dominant power. For the last 50 years, US has been the dominant power for 70 years. So here is China, which is emerging, and which is actually, there is a fight for trade, resources, talent, and all of that, the science and the technology and everything. So there have been a lot of points where there is friction, and it will end in a war, because that is how, in the human history, emerging power which challenges a dominant power, it has always led to a violent clash between the two, and one power getting either decimated or getting subdued. That has been, I do not know of exceptions. There may be exceptions, but I am not very sure. So this is now being touted to predict or to foresee what will now happen in this US-China kind of tussle. You see?
Could you share the spelling of this? What principle is that? You mentioned
THY to CITIDES.
Yeah. Could you share that in email later so that we can?
I'll send you the email later. Yeah. Okay. It's called the Thucydides trap. So if there is an emerging power and there is a dominant power, you are trapped. You have to necessarily end in violence. There is no option for you. You will have a war someday. If not, sooner or later you will have a war, and that would decide either of them will remain as the dominant power, or a new power will emerge. Like, for instance, the Britain and Germany clashed in 2 world wars. Both got decimated in different ways, and the US emerged as the dominant power. So
now you have to, in order to make predictions from the theory, you have to have a theory of power. You also have to have a theory of violence. Under what conditions will you have, violence? And what counts as power? What kind of power, and so on. So I think this is not an easy thing to critically evaluate until the two theories are developed, and there is now an interaction between these two theories.
Yeah.
So surely not all kinds of power asymmetries result in violence. So take, for example, disagreements between Tara and me. Assume for the moment that I'm physically stronger, so I have more power. And assume that Tara is mentally stronger, so she has greater mental power. Is it necessary that the theory predicts that there'll be violence between us?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get your point. So I think I'm actually now trying to find out whether there has been an occasion where there has been a dominant world power which was challenged by an emerging power on a world stage, some other empire or state or nation or whatever, but which did not end in violence. So that would be but his typical historian would call it an exception and would move away from that,
Yeah, that's
would
a
say
cop
that, that doesn't fit in. So what?
In so-called social sciences, the word social, I don't like to use the word social science because many of these things have nothing to do with society. But the traditional excuse is, exception.
Right.
Instead of saying that, it's a counterexample is what we should say and deal with it. Can you construct a theory such that there is no counterexample?
Right.
So it's a lazy person's way out to say it's an exception.
Can I interject? Because I was thinking along the lines of what Sriram was talking about, and I realized that maybe a useful example would be in corporate history, because in several cases you have companies that maintain a monopoly or more of they command the common imagination and therefore have the public's attention. And when a competitor comes, in many a case, what happens is that the bigger company simply swallows up the smaller company in terms of corporate consolidation. So maybe a violent clash they do, but maybe not violently and not in a mutually destructive way, where you have a lot of examples from the last 2 decades, just from Facebook gobbling up Instagram and other related apps, or Google taking up YouTube. Or if you want to go a little further back, you also have companies like AT&T, which had to be broken up, where because they were the largest firm on the planet at one point. So maybe the competition results not necessarily in destruction, but modification in a weird way, where both the powers that be and the powers that emerge change in ways that we can't really predict.
I think we need to delimit the scope of the word power and also the violence or conflict. Because when Sriram was talking about the trap, he mentioned city-state. So in both of these examples, like if the theory is restricted to city-states, then these two examples would not be counter examples because they are not, like Mo and Tara or the two companies are not city-states. So we need to understand what is the nature of power that the theory would be about, right? So, and then if we sort of abstract away from those specifics and think of all kinds of dominance and resulting, impacts, what are all the different kinds and what would be the manifestations of different kinds of conflict in terms of the impact?
But this Thucydides trap is my fear is that it is becoming some kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because now that we know that a dominant power, when it is challenged by an emerging power, will lead to war. Everybody is talking about a war with China. Now US and China will fight a war. It is just a matter of time before they fight. So it's almost concluded that a future event is predicted, that because this is a trap, and this is what will happen. So that's a kind of consequence foreseeing which has been happening, which is a bit disturbing, because We do not know. I'm not very sure about this trap thing, but maybe, I mean, it holds good for, there seemed to be something to it because lots of things have happened. There is a pattern, at least, that a dominant power gets threatened by something else and an emerging power, and this leads to something. But yeah.
But,
Sorry.
oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Mo, or do you?
Okay, I was going to point to Huntington's thesis about clash of civilizations. This was, I don't know how long ago this book came out.
Yeah,
and the thesis was that there is a conflict between the West and the Islamic, Western civilization and Islamic civilization. Notice that this formulation is kind of dangerous, because when you say Western civilization, you are not talking about religion. But the moment you say Islamic, you're talking about religion. So the conflict is not between the West and the Islamic civilization, but you have to use the same. Let's say Christian versus Islamic is possible. But the moment you say Christian versus Islamic, you are immediately brought back to the what happened in the Middle Ages. And then you have to ask, was that an economic conflict or a religious conflict? So there are multiple grounds for the conflict. And to point to what you said about self-fulfilling prophecy, interestingly, when this book came out, US used it as a way to prepare for the attacks on the Islamic world. So it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because Huntington wrote that book, and they said, you see, Huntington is true, so we have to, and they started this business. And to add to that history, Fukuyama's revision of Huntington's thesis is a good reading for this issue of conflicts in the world. Notice that Huntington's thesis is not about city-states.
Right.
It's much more than, when you say the West, it consists of multiple city-states. But the problem is still the same: conflict resulting in violence.
Yeah.
So we need to have a general theory of conflict between human groups. And within that, you have to say, okay, given that general theory, what can we say about conflicts between nations, or conflict between collections of nations, or conflict which is not national, but other kinds of conflict?
Yeah, and I think it's not like this is the only theory. I mean, that could, even if we assume that's the only theory of power or conflict, there would be other interacting theories, such as theory of war or economic theory. Because if we think of what causes war, conflict may be necessary but not sufficient for war to proceed. There may be other things. So other theories would also have predictions about whether or not a war would happen. And then they have to be logically connected as well in order for you to determine whether a war will actually happen or not. Because it's not just the conflict, but there are other circumstances that may be different. And it could be a combination of several factors that decide whether or not a war would happen.
Yeah. I want to go back to
war.
Sorry, I want to go back to the moral of the of what Rashmi is saying. We know that quite often to determine the truth of a proposition, we have to combine that with other propositions to construct a theory. So what we need is an interaction between propositions. And the same thing is true about theories. In order to determine the truth of a theory, you have to combine it with other theories. And what you're doing is combinations of theories. You can call it families of theories or extended families of theories. And ultimately, it boils down to the entire body of human knowledge, all of these. Of course, it becomes extremely difficult to make predictions from the entire body of knowledge. But essentially, unless you kind of move up the level of abstraction, in many cases, if you just look at a very tiny theory, local theory, you may end up in confusion. So you have to go back and forth between the big picture of totality of human knowledge and a specific proposition. We need both.
when we develop curriculum for history, then a part of it, in the would be on building the capability for historical inquiry.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, children will also need to be given the body of current human knowledge regarding our history. Now, in that, would only one family of theories of history would be passed on to the children, or could there be competing theories of history, in which, like, say, for example, in this, in a note that Mo shared, historians do not accept the historicity of Yudhishthir, but they accept the historicity of Jesus. So then, in the history books, how do we, how do we differentiate between the two?
When you say teaching children, what is the age group, like primary school, secondary school, undergraduate?
To grade 10.
Grade 10. I think let's begin with, let's say, grade 6, slightly younger. And until they have had the experience of constructing histories, they would know how to choose between competing theories. So, which is why I suggested something like, this is in our write-up, Tara and I wrote this thing, asking students to construct history of the states of affairs of their parents and their grandparents through oral evidence. And that gives them a sense of what it is like to construct history in very simple cases. And then gradually, this is very local in terms of space and time, gradually expand the range and then find out what happens when there are competing accounts. So helping students to understand what the academic historians know, and that should be done with great caution until students have sufficient mental capacity to critically evaluate what the academics say. It will be, I think, unwise to give them what the academics tell them. So, for example, I don't think 6th graders and 8th graders have the capacity to choose between whether Aryans came from outside to India or from India to outside. Two competing hypotheses. It's way too much for 8th graders, 10th graders to read up that stuff. It's enormous. And a great deal of evidence comes from linguistics, which the proponents of these theories are actually unaware of. So I would say begin with very simple things. Give them exercises to develop their mental muscles before getting into complicated academic bodies of knowledge.
Actually, one of the things, the example that Chirantan brought up of Yudhishthira and Jesus, it's I think with children, if you're starting in 6th grade, it's important to make the distinction between history on the one hand and mythology on the other. And begin from there and then ask the question, is this history or mythology? Because otherwise, it's very easy to think of mythology as history.
Yeah.
And I think children need to be protected from that.
Yeah. Maybe it's a good thing to begin with something like Harry Potter. So lots of kids, love Harry Potter. We can ask them, did such a person as Harry Potter exist? And what would happen if 500 years later, children were reading Harry Potter and treating it as history? How will you engage with that person 500 years later? And they have to figure out how to engage in this disagreement. Harry Potter is fiction versus Harry Potter is history.
What you just pointed out gave me a sort of an epiphany where history doesn't really exist but the facts or the evidence that you are using to construct history exist. So you basically craft a wrapper or a story around a given set of evidence, and that's how history itself comes into existence, and that's how you get other people to agree with what you're talking about, and that becomes more or less accepted knowledge or common sense about how history or how a certain incident in history has been reviewed. So it's more of the story itself and not necessarily history as an existence. It doesn't exist separately from the stories that historians build based on the evidence that people see.
Yeah.
And also this story, what Kaustubh is saying, has been changing and could change so drastically over a period of, say, 100 years or even 10 years or 20 years. So one question, I asked students is, supposing you present both sides of a sort of contested view of whether, say, for example, Indus Valley, whether it was a Vedic civilization or a Dravidian civilization or some other civilization or whatever. We tried to do it with a simple example of sambar. Whether it was actually named after this Sambhaji fellow. Then we presented them a lot of interesting facts saying that Sambhaji could not have come to Tanjavur and tasted this sambar. I mean, there is enough evidence not evidence, but there is enough evidence to show that Sambhaji was occupied elsewhere. So could he have found the time? What do you think? Blah blah. But we also ask one question, that what would change your stance now? What is one evidence that would totally make it clear that sambar existed before Sambhaji? For example, there is an inscription in a pillar, in a temple, which predates Sambhaji. You can verify it with some technique, and you know that it was most certainly before the Sambhaji time. And if this word sambar is mentioned there, or if the recipe is mentioned there, would you now conclude that this whole Sambhaji sambar link is a flawed one? We ask such questions. What would change? Supposing based on the current evidence, what you gather on both sides, you have arrived at certain view. Now, what would change that? What would make you believe that, well, Jesus did exist? Or what would make you believe that Yudhishthira did exist? What would be that evidence? What will you seek? So that sets them on a interesting kind of journey, So
I want to underscore what the principle that Sriram just articulated, namely, scientific inquiry must have a commitment to looking for counterexamples, deliberately looking for counterexamples, actively seeking out. Without that, it becomes confirmation bias. You are looking only for supporting evidence. You are ignoring counterexamples. That is not sufficient. In fact, you should look for counterexamples. And for that, you have to have an understanding of what would constitute a counterexample to your theory. If it's a good theory, it must give predictions about what cannot exist if the theory were true.
Yeah.
So,
and in some sense, it all begins with a doubt. For instance, Ashoka was assumed to be a Sri Lankan king for decades or for centuries, till the time some British guy who was working in a clerk who was working in some mint in India started doubting that was he really a Sri Lankan king. But there are some evidences here. And Ashoka's name was not mentioned as Ashoka in various places. So it was that Devanampiya, etc. He deduced that this is Ashoka, and then corroborated all that, and then came to the conclusion, which was so drastically different from what was held, that he was not in Sri Lanka at all. He never went to Sri Lanka, but he was a Mauryan king. He was in Patna, or Pataliputra, whatever we call it. Then the whole story began constructed about it. So it takes some doubting sense to challenge an accepted kind of a notion that, this is what happened and this was it. Now someone challenges it, saying that, hey, could that be false? Could that be not true? Then you need some provocation for that doubting. You need to say, this is not tying up, this is not happening, I'm not accepting this. This is not there doesn't seem to be a valid explanation. Then why is it here? Why is it there? Some such thing. And then you go on, pursuing that query more and more, and then you probably end up in a gold mine, which totally changes the view of something that happened in the past. That's how it happened with Ashoka. That's how it happened with Harappa. I mean, people were using the bricks of Harappan civilization for laying railway lines. So then somebody wondered that, these bricks seem to be so old. So, and who had these bricks? What was city or a state which has, so one led to the other, and then they discovered that, oh, this predates everything that we knew. So now, as Akhilan said about archaeology, that is not complete yet. We don't know that this is end of our past. Indus Valley is where everything began. We don't know. We don't know other civilizations might have existed. Indus Valley itself could be predated. We have no idea. As of now, this is it. We accept it as of now. But there is always space for doubting that, questioning that, changing it.
On that note of doubting, questioning, and uncertainty, shall we?
Hold on, Tara, one moment.
Yes.
One moment. We have to figure out, we have to decide, or at least think about what we should do next Saturday. So if there are, we kind of unilaterally decided it is going to be history and constructing theories in history and so on. But if there are questions that you guys have, please let us know. Then we'll arbitrarily pick one of those questions. So we don't want it to be questions that we have decided as a clockwork thing.
Not just questions, other general issues as well.
Yeah.
Not just related to this, but other things as well.
Yeah. What do we want to discuss in the next?
That's for email discussion, I guess.
Yeah. Even the people who are not participating in the spoken discussion should send us some idea of what they wish to include in the agenda.
Is biology safe ground?
Pardon me?
Is biology safe ground for the discussion?
Sure.
Oh,
sure. Why not?
Nothing is completely safe and nothing is completely unsafe. Yeah.
Biology is not safe from Mo.
Yeah. So send us a formulation of some, agenda item. And if there is only one, we'll follow that. Or if there is, 2 or 3, we'll have a discussion and then, decide. Okay. So I think it may be a good idea to stick to this 1 hour condition. Otherwise, what's going to happen is 13 has already become 11. I think we had 13 to begin with somewhere. And 2 people have left, and people might be busy if they think that is 4 to 5. We should end at 5 roughly. So
it sounds like you're saying that to yourself.
Yeah, that is yeah. I don't normally like this 1 hour restriction, but there might be because I like free flowing discussion that goes on to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but not beyond 10. For obvious reasons.
In which case, we should probably start at 9.
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Good to
see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye. Good to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.